In 1952, a family therapist named Murray Bowen encountered a case that would revolutionize our understanding of family dynamics. A mother brought her 17-year-old daughter to his clinic, insisting the girl needed psychiatric treatment. The daughter was rebellious, dramatic, and constantly stirring up trouble. The mother presented a compelling case: school problems, conflict with siblings, emotional outbursts that disrupted the household peace. Bowen agreed to see the family together, a radical approach at the time. What he observed in that first session shattered the foundational assumption of psychiatry, that the person with symptoms is the person with the problem. The daughter sat quietly, almost invisibly, while the father raged, the mother wept, and the siblings traded barbed comments. The supposedly troubled teenager was the calmest person in the room. Over weeks of observation, Bowen discovered something extraordinary. Whenever the daughter began to heal, to become less dramatic, more emotionally regulated, the family system destabilized catastrophically. The parents' marriage, which had been stable, suddenly erupted into open warfare. An older sibling who had been perfectly fine developed panic attacks. The family, unconsciously and with remarkable coordination, began sabotaging the daughter's progress. Why? Because the family didn't need her to get better. They needed her to stay broken. She was serving a function far more critical than anyone consciously understood. She was the lightning rod for the family's collective dysfunction, the container for everyone else's unprocessed pain, the scapegoat whose suffering allowed the rest of the system to maintain the illusion of health. Bowen coined a term for this phenomenon: the identified patient, the family member designated to carry the symptoms of a sick system. But Carl Jung, working decades earlier, had identified an even deeper pattern underlying this dynamic. He called it shadow projection, the psychological mechanism by which we exile our most unacceptable qualities and then encounter them with shock and horror in another person. In families, this projection doesn't happen. It happens systematically, generation after generation, creating a role that every family system unconsciously requires: the black sheep. The bridge, your family's secret truth teller. If you've ever been the one labeled too sensitive, too dramatic, the troublemaker, or the difficult one while watching your family ignore glaring dysfunction around you, then you know what Bowen discovered. If you've pointed out uncomfortable truths only to be told you're overreacting or imagining things, if you felt like you're living in a different reality than the rest of your family, if your attempts to heal have been met with subtle or overt sabotage, you're not crazy. You're encountering one of the most powerful and least understood dynamics in family psychology. The uncomfortable truth is this: dysfunctional families need a black sheep the way a pressure cooker needs a release valve. Without someone to absorb the family's collective shadow, their denied shame, suppressed rage, unacknowledged fear, hidden inadequacy, the entire system would have to face what it's been desperately avoiding. And that confrontation feels more threatening than scapegoating one member. But here's what most people never understand: being chosen as the black sheep isn't random, and it isn't evidence of your deficiency. In Jungian psychology, the black sheep is often the most psychologically aware member of the family, the one whose nervous system is sensitive enough to detect the buried dysfunction, whose integrity won't allow them to participate in the collective delusion. The black sheep isn't the sickest member of the family, they're often the healthiest, which is precisely why the system must marginalize them. Jung understood that what families call the problem child is frequently the truth teller, the one who sees through the family's carefully constructed facade and, by their very existence, threatens to expose what everyone else is working frantically to hide. This makes them dangerous. And so, the family, operating beneath conscious awareness, creates an elaborate system to discredit, exile, and silence them. Not because they're wrong, but precisely because they're right. Principle 1. The shadow container function. Every family has a shadow, a repository of qualities, feelings, and truths that the collective system deems unacceptable. Rage, weakness, sexuality, failure, neediness, vulnerability, ambition that threatens others. These aspects don't disappear simply because the family refuses to acknowledge them. They must go somewhere. And in dysfunctional families, they go into the black sheep. Jung called this projection, the unconscious mechanism by which we disown aspects of ourselves and then perceive them with certainty in another person. In families, this operates as a collective phenomenon. The family needs somewhere to put their collective shadow, and they unconsciously designate one member as the container. This person becomes the carrier of all the emotional content the family cannot consciously process. The mechanism is elegant and devastating. The father who cannot acknowledge his own rage projects it onto his son, then punishes the son for being angry. The mother who suppressed her own creativity as a young woman unconsciously sabotages her daughter's artistic ambitions. The family that cannot face its dysfunction projects all their unprocessed pain onto one member, then blames that member for causing problems. The black sheep isn't generating the family's darkness, they're reflecting it back. Consider Maria's story. In a family where emotions were forbidden and image was everything, she was the only member who cried, who expressed anger, who couldn't maintain the facade of perfection. Her family labeled her overly emotional and dramatic. But family therapy revealed a different truth. Maria wasn't more emotional than her siblings. She was simply the only one allowed to feel. Her brothers suppressed grief, her sisters denied rage, her father's unacknowledged fear. All of it was unconsciously channeled into Maria, who expressed the family's shadow while everyone else maintained the illusion of emotional control. The family genuinely believed Maria was the problem. They couldn't see that she was actually serving a critical function, expressing the emotions that would have destroyed the system if they'd remained buried. She was the family's emotional truth teller, and they needed her in this role far more than they consciously realized. How to recognize this pattern? If you're the black sheep, notice what qualities your family criticizes in you. Are you too sensitive in a family that cannot acknowledge emotional pain? Too rebellious in a family that demands conformity to a false image? Too ambitious in a family threatened by achievement? These criticisms reveal what the family's collective shadow contains. You're not defective. You're reflecting back what they cannot face in themselves. But the shadow container function is only the beginning. The black sheep serves an even more critical purpose in maintaining the family's homeostasis. Principle 2. The homeostatic stabilizer role. Family systems, like all living systems, seek homeostasis, a stable equilibrium that feels safe even when it's profoundly dysfunctional. The black sheep is essential to this homeostasis because their designated brokenness allows everyone else to feel fixed by comparison. As long as there's someone to blame, no one else has to change. Family systems theorist Murray Bowen discovered that families have a predetermined anxiety set point. When anxiety in the system rises beyond this threshold, the family unconsciously activates mechanisms to discharge it. The most common discharge mechanism? Focusing collective attention and blame on the identified patient. This is why, whenever you, as the black sheep, begin to heal, the family system destabilizes. Your healing disrupts the homeostasis. The mechanism operates like this. Imagine a family where the parents' marriage is deeply troubled, but neither partner can face it. The anxiety from this unacknowledged marital dysfunction must go somewhere. Enter the black sheep child, who begins exhibiting problems, acting out, underperforming, rebelling. Suddenly, the parents have a shared project, fixing the problem child. Their marital conflict goes underground, replaced by united concern about their troubled teenager. The child's dysfunction has become the system stabilizer. When that child enters therapy and begins to genuinely improve, watch what happens. The parents, no longer unified by shared concern about the child, must face their marriage directly. This feels intolerable. So, unconsciously, with remarkable coordination, they begin sabotaging the child's progress. They forget therapy appointments. They create new crises that demand the child's attention. They subtly communicate that the child's health threatens the family. And the child, perceiving this at an unconscious level, often obliges by relapsing, because remaining broken feels safer than watching the family collapse. David's case illustrates this with painful clarity. After years of being the family scapegoat, he moved across the country and began intensive therapy. Within 6 months, his anxiety and depression, labeled chronic by his family, had significantly improved. He set boundaries with his parents, developed healthy relationships, and found meaningful work. His family's response? Outrage. His mother developed mysterious health crises that demanded he returned home. His siblings accused him of abandoning the family. His father threatened to disown him. The message was clear: your health threatens our system. Return to your designated role or face exile. How to work with this principle? If you're healing and your family responds with increased dysfunction or hostility, you're not imagining it. The system is attempting to restore homeostasis. Your job isn't to fix them or maintain their equilibrium. Your job is to maintain your own healing even as the system fights to pull you back. This requires understanding that their resistance isn't personal. It's mechanical. The system fears destabilization more than it values your well-being. Yet even this homeostatic function doesn't capture the black sheep's most radical role. They're the family's unconscious portal to transformation. Principle 3. The truth-teller designation. In Jung's framework, every family system contains truths that everyone knows but no one can speak. Affairs, addictions, abuse, financial collapse, mental illness, incest, rage, despair. These truths exist in the family's collective unconscious, creating a shared delusion. That requires constant energy to maintain. And then there's the black sheep, the one who can't or won't participate in the delusion. The black sheep is often the family member with the most acute perception, the one whose nervous system is too sensitive to ignore the dissonance between what's said and what's true. They're the child who asks, "Why is Dad drunk again?" when everyone else pretends he's tired. They're the teenager who calls out the obvious favoritism when everyone else maintains that Mom treats us all the same. They're the adult child who names the abuse when everyone else has agreed to call it strict parenting. This makes them dangerous, because once the truth is spoken, the collective delusion becomes harder to maintain. The family has two choices: face the truth or eliminate the truth-teller. Dysfunctional families consistently choose the latter. They gaslight the truth-teller, telling them they're too sensitive, making things up, or remembering wrong. They ostracize the truth-teller, making them feel crazy for perceiving what everyone else claims isn't there. They discredit the truth-teller, ensuring that if they do speak, no one will believe them. Nicole Franco, a trauma therapist specializing in narcissistic family dynamics, identifies the truth-teller as one of the core roles in dysfunctional systems. The narcissistic parent is threatened by the truth-teller's awareness and attempts to gaslight or ostracize them, she writes. The truth-teller sees what others refuse to see, and this awareness makes them a target. But here's what Jung understood that modern psychology often misses. The truth-teller isn't just threatening the family system. They're offering it the only genuine path to transformation. By refusing to participate in the collective delusion, they create a crack in the facade, and through that crack, consciousness can enter. The family must choose: continue the delusion and exile the truth-teller, or face the truth and evolve. Rachel exemplifies this role. In a family where sexual abuse by an uncle was an open secret, known but never acknowledged, she was the only one who named it directly. Her family's response was swift and brutal. They accused her of trying to destroy the family, of seeking attention, of making a big deal out of nothing. They chose family gatherings where the abuser would be present, forcing Rachel to either participate in the denial or be absent. She chose absence. For 15 years, she was labeled the family problem, the one who couldn't let things go. But she was actually the family's conscience, the only member whose integrity wouldn't allow participation in collective evil. Her exile was the price of her truth-telling. How to embody this principle? If you're the black sheep truth-teller, recognize that your family's attempts to silence you aren't evidence that you're wrong. They're evidence that you're right. The intensity of the gaslighting corresponds directly to the significance of the truth you're revealing. Your job isn't to make them hear you. You can't force consciousness on an unwilling system. Your job is to honor your own perception even when everyone else denies it, to trust what you know even when you're told you're crazy. The truth-teller role leads directly to perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of being the black sheep, the initiation into psychological depth that others in the family will never experience. Principle 4. The forced individuation path. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who you truly are beneath conditioning, fear, and collective expectations. For most people, individuation is optional, a path they may or not choose. For the black sheep, it's mandatory, because you cannot remain unconscious and survive in the role you've been given. Being the family scapegoat creates what Jung called an initiation by exile. You're ejected from the collective, forced to stand alone, stripped of the family identity that gave you a sense of belonging. This is psychologically devastating, but it's also, paradoxically, a profound gift. Because exile forces a question that those who remain comfortably within the system never have to face. Who am I when I'm not performing the role my family assigned me? The black sheep who remains unconscious becomes bitter, defined entirely by their victimization, forever blaming their family for their suffering. But the black sheep who uses their exile as initiation undergoes a transformation that elevates them beyond what would have been possible within the system. They must develop discernment, the ability to distinguish their own perceptions from projections. They must cultivate inner authority, the capacity to trust themselves when everyone else says they're wrong. They must build identity independent of family validation. The scapegoat, because they are excluded from the idealized family narrative, is paradoxically the most likely to begin the individuation journey, notes a Jungian analysis. They are the first to be ejected from the illusion. Their exile is not punishment, it is initiation. Consider Marcus, who spent his 20s addicted, homeless, and suicidal after his family cast him out for being gay. The exile nearly destroyed him, but in his recovery, something remarkable happened. Without his family's constant messaging about who he should be, he discovered who he actually was. He developed a spiritual practice, built a chosen family, created art that expressed his authentic self. By 40, he'd achieved a psychological integration and self-knowledge that his successful siblings, still performing their assigned family roles, couldn't imagine. His exile had forced an individuation that led to genuine selfhood. But this transformation requires one critical element: the willingness to walk through the exile rather than spend your life trying to get back into the family. Many black sheep waste decades attempting to prove their worth to a system that needs them to be worthless. They achieve, they accomplish, they heal, and they bring these offerings back to the family, hoping finally to be seen. But the family cannot afford to see them. To acknowledge the black sheep's health would require acknowledging their own dysfunction. How to navigate this principle? Your forced individuation is complete when you stop seeking validation from the system that exiled you. When you can say, "I know who I am regardless of whether my family acknowledges it," you've transformed exile into liberation. This doesn't mean cutting off contact necessarily. It means releasing the need for them to change, to see you, to finally understand. Your freedom lies not in their recognition, but in your own self-knowledge. But even individuation doesn't complete the black sheep's function. There's a darker, more mystical role they often play: the family sacrificial healer. Principle 5. The transgenerational pattern breaker. Jung observed that families pass down psychological patterns across generations. Trauma, addiction, abuse, dysfunction, these don't begin with one generation and end there. They become what Jungians call ancestral complexes, psychological patterns that operate like autonomous entities, possessing successive generations. The family acts out the same dramas across decades, with different actors playing the same archetypal roles. Into this multi-generational cycle enters the black sheep, and something breaks. Often, the black sheep is the first family member in generations to say, "This ends with me." They're the one who gets sober when everyone before them drank. They're the one who leaves the abusive marriage when every woman in the family for 3 generations stayed. They're the one who gets therapy when seeking help is considered weakness. They break the pattern. This breaking is never clean or easy. The family system actively resists pattern breaking because patterns, even destructive ones, feel safer than the unknown. Murray Bowen documented how families will sabotage members who attempt to differentiate from multi-generational patterns. The one who stops drinking gets accused of thinking they're better than everyone. The one who sets boundaries gets labeled selfish. The one who names the abuse gets exiled. But from a Jungian perspective, the black sheep isn't just breaking patterns for themselves. They're performing a service for the entire family lineage, past, present, and future. When one person brings consciousness to an unconscious pattern, it creates what Jung called a psychic shift that reverberates through the entire system. The pattern loses some of its autonomous power. Future generations have a choice their ancestors didn't. Elena's story demonstrates this. She was the first woman in 5 generations not to marry an alcoholic. Her grandmother, mother, and aunt all repeated the pattern. When Elena began dating a sober man, her family responded with hostility. Her mother predicted the relationship would fail because you don't know how to be with a healthy man. Her aunt accused her of abandoning her roots. The family system was fighting to preserve the pattern, but Elena held firm. She married the sober man and built a healthy life. 20 years later, her niece, watching Elena's example, also chose a healthy partner. The pattern had been broken. One person's consciousness had created a new possibility for an entire lineage. How to serve this function? Recognize that when your family resists your pattern breaking, they're not just rejecting you personally. They're unconsciously protecting the familiar pattern, even if it's destructive. Your job isn't to make them support your breaking, it's to break anyway. Document your journey, so future generations know someone in the family achieved consciousness. This documentation becomes an ancestral gift. Decades from now, a descendant struggling with the same patterns will discover your story and realize, if they did it, I can too. Yet there's one more function the black sheep serves, perhaps the most profound and least recognized. They're the family's moral conscience. Principle 6. The ethical mirror function. In families that have lost their way ethically, where lies are normal, boundaries are violated, cruelty is minimized, the black sheep often remains strangely committed to fundamental moral principles that everyone else has abandoned: honesty, justice, respect, protection of the vulnerable. These aren't abstract values for the black sheep, they're lived necessities. And this commitment makes them profoundly threatening. The black sheep serves as the family's ethical mirror. Their refusal to participate in collective wrongdoing reflects back what the family has become. When everyone lies and the black sheep tells the truth, the lie becomes visible. When everyone enables the abuser and the black sheep confronts them, the enabling becomes indefensible. When everyone maintains appearances and the black sheep names reality, the facade cracks. This is why dysfunctional families often describe their black sheep in moral terms: selfish, disloyal, ungrateful, judgmental. These accusations serve to invert the ethical reality. The black sheep, who is often the most ethical member of the family, gets cast as morally deficient precisely to neutralize their moral clarity. If the family can convince everyone, including the black sheep themselves, that the black sheep lacks moral standing, then their ethical challenges can be dismissed. But Jung understood that this inversion reveals something crucial. The scapegoat is destructive, but in truth, the scapegoat is the most honest one in the room, as one Jungian analysis states. They don't wear the mask, they live the wound. Their very presence, unmasked, unwilling to pretend, becomes an implicit indictment of everyone else's performance. Lisa Romano, a therapist specializing in family scapegoat dynamics, writes, "If you are a truth teller, chances are you have also become the family scapegoat child. The family scapegoat is the member of the family that is devalued due to their ability and willingness to tell the truth and go up against family norms. The black sheep's ethical function, she notes, is precisely what makes them dangerous to the system. Consider James, who was exiled from his family for refusing to participate in financial fraud his father was orchestrating. The family framed his refusal as disloyalty and betrayal. They told him he was destroying the family by not going along. But James was actually the only family member maintaining ethical integrity. His exile was the price of his refusal to become complicit in collective wrongdoing. 20 years later, when the fraud was exposed and the family faced legal consequences, they blamed James, saying if he helped, they wouldn't have gotten caught. The ethical inversion was complete. The one who maintained integrity was blamed for the consequences of those who abandoned it. How to hold this function? Your ethical clarity is not self-righteousness, even when your family labels it that way. You're not holier than thou. You're simply unwilling to participate in what you recognize as wrong. This unwillingness will be pathologized. The family will construct elaborate rationalizations for why their ethical violations are actually fine, and your standards are actually the problem. Your work is to maintain your own moral compass while releasing the need for them to validate it. Sometimes, being the family's conscience means standing alone. But all these functions lead to one final, devastating recognition. The role of the black sheep isn't natural. It's constructed through deliberate, if unconscious, family mechanisms. Principle 7. The manufacturing mechanisms. The black sheep doesn't emerge organically. They're manufactured through specific, identifiable psychological mechanisms that the family deploys unconsciously to create and maintain the scapegoat role. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial because it reveals that your exile wasn't inevitable, it was orchestrated. Differential treatment. The family treats the black sheep differently from other siblings, and this differential treatment begins early. Mistakes are punished more harshly. Achievements are dismissed or minimized. Emotional needs are ignored. Over time, this differential treatment teaches the child, "I'm less valuable than others." It also signals to siblings that this child is available for scapegoating. Disproportionate blame. When problems arise in the family, responsibility gets disproportionately assigned to the black sheep. If multiple children are involved in mischief, the black sheep receives the harshest punishment. If the family is struggling financially, somehow the black sheep's needs are framed as the cause. This creates a pattern where the black sheep internalizes, "Everything bad is my fault." Projection of parental self-hatred. Perhaps most insidiously, some parents unconsciously project their own self-loathing onto a chosen child. The parent who secretly despises themselves for being weak projects that quality onto a sensitive child and then punishes the child for being too emotional. The parent cannot tolerate certain aspects of themselves, so they locate those aspects in a child and despise the child instead. Jung called this psychic dumping, using another person as a repository for unbearable self-knowledge. Gaslighting and reality distortion. When the black sheep accurately perceives family dysfunction, the family responds with gaslighting. "You're too sensitive. That never happened. You're imagining things. You're the one causing problems by bringing this up." This systematic reality distortion serves to protect the family illusion by making the black sheep doubt their own perception. Over years, this can create devastating self-doubt. Strategic enabling of the golden child. Many dysfunctional families create a binary, the golden child and the scapegoat. The golden child receives preferential treatment, validation, and resources. The scapegoat receives criticism, rejection, and blame. This binary serves the family by creating a good child to celebrate, allowing parents to feel successful, and a bad child to blame, allowing parents to avoid responsibility for dysfunction. The children are pitted against each other, preventing sibling solidarity that might challenge parental authority. Punishment for healing. Perhaps most revealing, families often punish the black sheep specifically when they begin to heal and individuate. The family member who gets sober is accused of thinking they're better than everyone. The one who goes to therapy is told they're making the family look bad. The one who sets boundaries is labeled selfish. This reveals that the family needs the black sheep to remain dysfunctional. Psychologist Emmy Lowe describes the cumulative effect. As the family members discharge their emotional accountability or suppressed resentment, the black sheep of the family naturally becomes the carrier of all the angst in the family. The role isn't accidental. It's systematically constructed through these layered mechanisms. How to dismantle the mechanisms? Recognition is the first step. When you can identify, that was differential treatment, not accurate assessment of my worth. Or, that's projection, not reality. The mechanisms lose their power. You begin to separate what's yours from what was placed on you. This separation is the foundation of healing. Integration, transforming exile into liberation. If you've recognized yourself in these 7 principles, you're facing a choice that will determine whether your black sheep role becomes a wound that defines you or an initiation that transforms you. The family needs you to remain in the role they assigned, broken, blamed, exiled. Your liberation requires refusing that role while simultaneously recognizing the profound psychological and spiritual work it's forced you to undertake. The 90-Day Black Sheep Integration Protocol. For 3 months, commit to specific practices that transform your relationship to the role. Week 1 to 4, Shadow Reclamation. List every quality your family criticized in you. For each one, ask, is this actually problematic, or is it simply different from what my family valued? Reclaim the qualities that aren't actually deficits, but differences. Your sensitivity might be perceptiveness. Your rebelliousness might be autonomy. Your selfishness might be healthy self-protection. Week 5 to 8, Truth Documentation. Write down the truths about your family that everyone denied. Not to weaponize them, but to validate your own perception. When you can say, this happened regardless of whether anyone else acknowledges it, you reclaim your reality. Week 9 to 12, Boundary Fortification. Identify which family interactions undermine your well-being. Create boundaries, not as punishment, but as self-protection. This might mean limiting contact, ending certain conversations, or declining gatherings that require you to play the scapegoat role. Your healing depends on refusing to participate in dynamics that harm you. Ethical warning. As you individuate and heal, you may feel tremendous guilt. You're breaking the family's homeostasis, violating their unspoken rules, refusing your assigned role. The guilt is the system's final attempt to pull you back. But here's what Jung understood. You're not responsible for maintaining a dysfunctional system. Choosing your own health over your family's dysfunction isn't selfish, it's the only ethical choice available. Black sheep who complete this integration often discover something remarkable. The qualities that made them dangerous to their families make them extraordinarily valuable to the world. Their truth-telling becomes leadership. Their sensitivity becomes healing capacity. Their refusal to conform becomes creative innovation. Their forced individuation becomes wisdom they can offer others still trapped in collective delusion. The exile that nearly destroyed them becomes the initiation that created their greatest gifts. The closing. The sacred wound. In 1952, Murray Bowen watched a family sabotage their daughter's healing because her health destabilized their dysfunction. He discovered that the identified patient wasn't sick, the family system was. The daughter wasn't the problem, she was the symptom of problems everyone else refused to face. Carl Jung understood this dynamic at an even deeper level. The black sheep, he recognized, carries the family's shadow. But in carrying it, they often develop a relationship with darkness, with truth, with the depth of the psyche that those who remain comfortable in the light never access. The black sheep's exile is a sacred wound. It destroys the false self the family tried to construct and forces the birth of the true self that was always waiting beneath. If you're the black sheep, your family needed you in that role to maintain their illusion. They needed someone to blame, someone to carry their shadow, someone to absorb their projected dysfunction. They needed a truth teller to discredit, a pattern breaker to punish, a mirror to shatter. Without you, they would have had to face themselves, and that confrontation felt more threatening than scapegoating you. But here's what they didn't understand. By exiling you, they freed you. You were forced out of the collective delusion and into truth. You were initiated into depths of psychological awareness they'll never access. You were granted the terrible gift of knowing yourself beyond their definitions. The question isn't whether you were the black sheep. If you've read this far with recognition, you were. The question is, will you remain defined by your exile, or will you transform it into liberation? Will you spend your life trying to get back into a system that needs you excluded? Or will you build a life beyond their definitions? Your family needed the black sheep to survive their dysfunction, but you don't need the role anymore. The exile they imposed is complete. What you do with your freedom now, that's where your real life begins.